Ahoy! Well, today let's talk about fiberglass and epoxy boat repairs. And you know, when you have a boat, if you know some basics, maybe a little bit more than the basics, with working with fiberglass and resins, or epoxy, as most of us do, it's going to save you a lot of money and a lot of downtime. Well, over the past 11 years of having this boat, I've learned a lot about working with fiberglass and epoxy. Now, I'm not an expert, but I've learned a lot and I've talked to a lot of the experts. The good thing is, hey, the boat's still afloat. So I couldn't have done too bad. I've had some big repairs, not major structural things, but some good size repairs. Filling old through holes I didn't need, some below the water line, some a little bit above the water line, and of course just a lot of general projects. Well, first let's review the different types of fiberglass that most recreational boaters are going to use. Now, a couple of things about working with fiberglass. One, always wear protective gloves. The disposable gloves are fine for a couple of reasons. One, so that you don't get oils from your hand on the fiberglass. And sometimes there's some sharp points on there. You don't want to get stuck with it. You want to keep the fiberglass neat and clean. The other thing is, especially with chop mat, roll the fiberglass. Now, here, you see, my son gave me this bag of fiberglass, this matte fiberglass from one of his renters that left it behind. And you see, this is why you don't want to fold it. You want to roll it when possible. The other thing is, make sure you have good sharp scissors to cut it with. If they get a little dull, sharpen them up or get a new pair. So there are a lot of different types of fiberglass, a lot of different weights. But the most popular ones, and the ones that most recreational boaters are going to use, is going to be, well, it's going to be this chop mat. And you see it's fairly rigid, but this really absorbs a lot of epoxy and sticks well. So if you're working with something with wood, you may want to use this first and then go over it with another type of cloth. And here we've got, which is probably the most popular cloth, is this 1708 cloth mesh. It's very popular and it's biaxial. And you see let me see here. So here you can kind of see the threads are running at a 45-degree angle and across. And on the back side, it's got a chop mat. So this works out really well. And you see how nice and flexible this is compared to something like this. Not as well. And another one, which is more structural, super heavy, is a woven rove, which is this. And you can see how thick this is, and this is going to absorb a lot of epoxy also. And if you're using this and you're going to go over it and you want a nice smooth coat, then you're going to want to go with the chop mat to level that out a little bit. Here you can see on the side of my boat, the inside here, where they've used this for the structure, and originally it had a cloth over it, but I took that down because it just got mold and mildewy. Now, as far as the 1708, you can buy it in small packages like this, and it is folded. As long as you're not moving it around a lot, I guess you'll be all right. But I usually buy a long roll of it and just use a little bit at a time. And another thing that comes in very handy is called fiberglass tape. Well, it's really not sticky on each side of tape. But you see it's got a nice clean edge on both sides. It's pliable. And this works really well on edges, and you'll see where we do some boat repairs where this comes in super handy. Now, most of these fiberglass cloth and mats will come in different thicknesses. Like the bigger one that we saw, that comes into like a 14 ounce. The 1708 that I have is I believe that's a 4 ounce. And even the fiberglass tape, that'll come in different widths and different thicknesses. So you got a lot of options to work with there, which makes it great for a variety of projects. Now let's take a look at the binding agent that holds all this together, and it's resin. A lot of people think, oh, I'm working with fiberglass, I have to have epoxy. Well, that's probably the best choice and the most readily available. But there are two primary types of resin, and there's a lot of different resins out there. And I'm not a chemist, and this isn't going to be a chemistry class. I just want to get you familiar with some of the basics and some of the options that you might have. And something that's become very popular, especially with boat manufacturer, is a polyester resin. And that's got some pluses and minuses, and there's several different types of that as well. There's an iOS, there's the Ortho, the DCPD, and I looked some of that up, and I'll tell you what, the words on that are like this. What makes a difference? Well, the most popular one is the iOS, which has got some good holding power and some strength to it. The big reason that's become popular is that it's less expensive. And in some ways, it's almost more difficult to work with because it doesn't have the same property as epoxy. Now, if you're using a polyester on a project and then you're going to put a gel coat over it, well, then you're going to need a gel coat that is polyester. Now, there are some polyester gel coats that are made to go with epoxy, and if you're using an epoxy, well, then just use an epoxy gel coat. Well, epoxy is another resin, which is probably the most popular and has been around the longest. It's strong, it cures well, it's got good holding power, it's water resistant, and I think, for my part anyway, that's what I've been using. I'm used to using it. I like how it works. Now, there's a lot of different manufacturers of epoxy, and I happen to use Moss Epoxy, and I've used them since the beginning of when I started this boat project. And they have a variety of different epoxies. There's the traditional epoxy, which I use, the marine epoxy. The flag, which is non-blushing, which means it's not going to turn yellow or you don't need to wipe it down, and that's more of a clear. But you know, it's a two-part also. And here you'll see on their website, they've got several different epoxies that you can choose from. The LV, the flag. Now, those are sag resistant, which means they're a little thicker, more like a creamy compared to the traditional epoxy that is very loose. It's very easy to brush on and works well. There's a caulk filler. They even make a penetrating epoxy. Now, I use the traditional epoxy and just add 1 part of acetone, and that makes my penetrating, what I use for penetrating epoxy. They've also got a fairing compound, which is a 2-part that doesn't require an additional catalyst, a 2-part, part A and part B, or 1 and 2. One of those is the catalyst, and that's a nice creamy, it's thick already, it's good for working on smoothing out surfaces where you might have some uneven areas that you need to smooth out, or like where we use the rove and wove, or the woven rove, and it's still, you can still see the fiberglass fibers. This will smooth that out to make a nice smooth surface. So now once you pick out which epoxy you want to use, and like I said, I use the traditional, you're going to need a catalyst or something to harden it with. And there's 3 different kinds. There's the fast, medium, and slow. Now I use the slow because I work slow, and it gives me a little bit more time to get everything done, especially in the summer where it's hot. I've had where I've mixed up a little bit of epoxy and got the fast hardener in it. Man, within 10 minutes, that stuff, it just got too difficult to work with. So then I went to the slow, and I've been very happy with that because I'm in no hurry to get it done. And even the slow, that starts hardening probably within 15 to 20 minutes. So again, you don't want to mix a lot of that up ahead of time. So depending on what your project is, how fast you need to get it done, and what the weather temperature is, you'll need a hardener. Now, if you're not using the 2-part fairing compound, which most people, I mean, I don't have a lot of room to store things, so I just use a fairing compound, and there's several different types of fairing compound. Here I've got the cello fill, and this is more of a structural, and you'll see it's kind of white. It's easy to work with, and this is where you really want to wear a dust mask when you're using this, because you don't want those particles floating up and breathing those in. Now another one that I use is, not sure of the pronunciation of it, Phenolic, and that is for easier sanding. So this is not as structural as the cello fill is. It's still solid though. And then you have a special fairing compound for wood. So you have a few options on what to use for a fairing compound, and a thickening to make that epoxy thicken. And you'll see that when we go into various boat repairs, where like for filling small holes, that thickened epoxy with the fairing compound just makes a lot of sense to use that. The other thing that I use is the acetone, which I mentioned. I make a penetrating epoxy with that, and I'm sure the actual penetrating epoxy is going to work a little better than my mix, but that's worked really well, and a lot of people just use that. Plus the acetone is used for cleaning things up. So now in our next video, we'll talk about how to work with epoxy in fiberglass, some do's and don'ts, and some tips. So stay tuned. And so until next time, guys, happy and safe boating to you, your family, and friends.